At this time, I want to invite all the rest of our wonderful panelists to come back, to turn their videos back on, to continue the conversation, hopefully until 2 p.m. Eastern. And I know we got cut a little bit short with our support and research panel, and Dr. Brutus had her hand raised. So I just want to first, if it's okay with Dr. Brutus, turn it over to you to complete that part of that really rich conversation and your comment.
Yeah, just really quickly talking about the systems piece. That is a huge piece, and I love how it was presented, that it's important to not only have these conversations at the individual level, but really recognizing the different organizations and the structures that we're all navigating to figure out who are the decision makers. How can we influence the ear of those decision makers? Because ultimately it comes down to decisions that are made in terms of allocation of resources as it relates to the real estate in the different organizations to be able to provide the services on site. And then also just kind of really honing in on what Ivan shared earlier, not just looking at the traditional lens of the one-on-one human interaction, but really being able to support some of the additional supplemental support, such as the technology, and really getting into that space too. So that's what I wanted to kind of share with that. And I won't take up too much more time with that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I just want to also mention that this time in this forum, I encourage the panelists to just unmute yourself and speak up, because this really is an opportunity to continue some of the important discussions that we'd had. We do have a few questions that came in, and we'll of course pose them, but I want to make sure that everybody has, feels that they can just sort of join into the conversation.
Thank you again to everyone. We do have some interesting questions that have been coming in, and so I want to sprinkle those in as well. So the first one is, and we can sort of pose this to the whole group, how do you think the US media portrays athletes in relation to mental health? Last summer, we saw some divisive perspectives in respect to Simone Biles at the Olympic Games.
Should I speak? Is that okay?
Please.
I really think that the toughest thing, look, I saw this happen with physical and mental health injuries across the board, where like, if there was no proof, people did not believe that there was an issue. And that I think is like really, really dangerous, because you have to assume that these athletes are generally, like, you can assume have like a lot of integrity with their pain tolerance, whether it's physical or mental. Like, again, I'm just gonna like classify them as similar. Like, so if she said something like, I'm in pain, or I might be in pain physically or mentally, and people didn't believe her, that's such a problem. And it's hard, because she was in a position to be able to turn down opportunities and still like probably be okay financially or professionally, although probably challenged to be put under that spotlight. But what about the athletes who like can't afford to like step down from something for their own mental health and still like be okay in their, secure life? So I was just like baffled that she could say something and then what she said was not taken at face value. Like, the word pain had no meaning. And I think that's a really tough thing, is that the word pain has to matter simply because we said it.
I will add to that. I think that this is true what Alexi is saying. I also think that for me, I have to understand what is the goal of the journalists, and their goal is to communicate and to entertain and to bring a story that's fresh and alive and has a lot of drama and excitement. And they have to pander to an audience who really wants to hear what they want to hear on their terms. I don't know that they really wanted to really see anything other than the brilliance of Simone Biles. What they failed to realize, and what I think they did want to hear, is that she was the one lone active survivor of the Larry Nassar regime, the systemic abuse of those girls. They don't want to hear that. When you hear other stories of athletes and the journeys that they have, people don't want to hear that. They want athletes to say, shut up and dribble, or shut up and just go on. So they want to hear the story, but only so much of it. Now, do you fault journalists and media? No, because that's what they're paid to do. But I think we have to supplement that. And what Alexi's saying is just so powerful. If somebody says I'm in pain, it doesn't necessarily mean it's physical pain. It could be emotional pain that sometimes is more excruciating based on the longevity, based on how long it is. And Alexi was very courageous and humble in sharing her story. She had a lot of stuff dumped onto her. She had nothing to do with. She didn't ask for that. But she's been nothing short of brilliant in navigating that and continues the journey in doing so. You got to listen to that. She happens to be courageous enough to want to speak up and make you listen to it. But she had a story long before she was even querying. And again, I fist bump her and give her a big embrace for her courage and being honest and truthful about who she is and making herself visible. Because she's modeling what I think a lot of athletes are feeling.
Thank you both. I'm just going to pose another question, but feel free, anyone else, if you want to jump back to the media question. So this is another question from our audience. Not understanding the power one has as an athlete or non-athlete is an example of how systemic racism has impacted our mental well-being. Do you believe that systems athletes are part of have encouraged them to deny or undermine their power?
Yeah, because their power is who they are. It's not what they do. It just happened to just, perform at a higher level, right? Who classifies athletes as mystical heroes? It's consumers, because we watch them. The payments from the label unions and everything comes from consumers. The TV deals come from consumers, right? That doesn't mean the consumers have the right to depict what is good or what is not good for the athlete. We're talking about, most of us that's on this panel, we played sports, right? We did not want to play the sport. So when you're talking about Naomi and Simone saying, hey, they don't want to play, this is something that they've done their whole lives. The only reason that they would take themselves out if there's actually something that's impacting them. That doesn't make sense. If you're an athlete, you understand that. Like if I'm playing basketball, I'm going to continue playing, especially even if I'm running from traumas to play basketball, I'm going to continue playing, right? So if I'm going to take myself out the sport, it's because something's actually up. And to not understand that sometimes is difficult, having those dialogues. But yeah, that's my point on that.
And I would just share that it kind of goes back to something that I shared earlier during our panel, is taking the time to understand where the athlete is in their process. Because sometimes the messaging resonates in different time points depending on where they are throughout their journey, right? It can be really easy to retrospectively talk about things, but when we're in a close proximity to something, it might be difficult to see and hear. Because of the implications that it might have. Because once you see something, it becomes very difficult to unsee it, right? And so when you're talking about the question surrounding the larger, greater society, the macro experience, sport is a microcosm of society. And for some athletes, depending on the identity salience, that has implications on how they show up in these different environments. And so as a practitioner, it's important to not assume that certain things that are happening in the larger society is even on the cusp of the conscious level of the athlete until you've gotten the chance to really understand where the athlete is in the process, what their identity salience is, how strong that athletic identity is, how all these other intersecting identities are at play, right? So there's a lot that goes into understanding how to greatly support the athlete based off of where they are in their process.
Dr. Brutus, I wonder, there's another question that sort of relates to that identity salience piece that you just mentioned. A collegiate swimmer wrote in and said that they found it difficult to transition into the real world after their career. In some ways, swimming had enabled them to bury themselves in athletics so they didn't have to confront other areas of their life in which they were less confident. How can we do a better job of helping athletes know their self-worth and identity outside of sports so that it's not such a shock when their time as a competitive athlete and the structure, support, clarity, and status that come with that end? So I'm wondering to the whole group, what resources might be available, or how might one manage that, navigating that.
I'll add a few points. I think athletes have to continue to understand that this is a finite window of opportunity and that life is in a state of transition and there is going to be another. But I think something the athletes have all said, they can't be defined by what they do. It's a big mistake that people are making. And I think they really have to see themselves as genius and brilliant, no matter what they do, whether it's sport or whether it's business, being an entrepreneur. I think it's all the same. But I also think that it's an invitation, as I look at some of the questions here, that I think all coaches, trainers, athletes can engage in, which is really, and somebody mentioned this earlier, learning how to really listen to your inside, your interpersonal self, as well as to the outside. And I teach my students all the time that the key to maximizing LISTEN, you put out, we'll spell that word, and you move those letters around, you come up with the word silent. So the best way to listen to yourself, to the outside world, is to literally be silent. I invite my students to memorize the following mantra. A person will never see their reflection in running water. It is only when the water is still will the reflected image begin to emerge. I think if coaches really took on this mantra, if administrators took on this mantra, if trainers took on this mantra, and really began to look inside themselves, anchor and position themselves in their journey, and discover how they are being successful at navigating their journey, that's going to open a portal of understanding to the journey of the athletes that they are serving. So I think everybody has to get into the game of self-examination, being very humble with what they are discovering about themselves, and realize at the end of the day, at some level, we're all in the same place, trying to do for the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the still water metaphor, it's really interesting because it suggests like a natural, like a chapter between that you're accepting as like a given. And it's almost like, I don't know why I keep being like pregnancy is a good comparison, but like there used to not be a lot of embracing of like the I think there's a trimester after you give birth now that people are recognizing and calling it its own trimester. And I think some athletes have a second career built in while they're in their athletic career, but that doesn't need to be a thing people do. I think the thing would be to build into the conversation or into the expectation that there's a trimester after between the careers that is okay. And again, that should be built in after a big peak in an athletic career between seasons. It should just be that is an expected calm time where you don't know what's next, and that is actually really good, because it so I think it just like, I'm always just trying to put things into actions, and I'm like, if we could just build in like a chapter after an athletic career life where you're allowed, or like there's, I mean, look, financially, that's a whole other question. How do you make that okay for people? But like, if it's expected that there's a time in between and that's not a shameful thing, then maybe there then would be resources for that time, those transition resources. I know, like Dartmouth has that Tuck Bridge program to help athletes and people bridge into the professional career, but those are far and few between. They're competitive. They're not for everyone because it's for like 20 people or something that do it. But I think the more we can embrace that as a real time, the more the resources will start to like become a part of that time. But first, I think we have to switch the vocabulary, like you said, to embrace that still time as a real chapter.
Yeah.
And I just want to kind of add a little bit to that, because the reality for a lot of athletes that we don't talk about, I think we kind of alluded to it, but not explicitly stated it, is the socioeconomic status piece of it. And it's a luxury to be able to have space in between to make the adjustment for some. And it's not a luxury afforded to many, right? And even at the Olympic level, there's not a lot of resource allocation independently, so to speak, for a lot of individuals. And so it kind of goes back to what Alexi talked about earlier, where there's this interesting dance that happens when the world sees you differently than who you are. So not only are you living this real experience of the potential of lack of resources to be able to have the space and opportunity to have gaps in time, but then the world perceives that you are this public figure, this face, and you're supposed to have it all together. And then now you've created a situation where now the athlete unfortunately internalizes that message as if there's something wrong with them, and it's something that they've done to find themselves in this position in this way. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that there are so many luxuries attached to the allocation of resources that can't go overlooked as well.
You know, oh no, you go ahead.
No, you go.
No, you go. I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, I don't know when you retired, Alexi, or if you're still competing, but I retired a couple of years ago in 2019, and it seems like yesterday, to be honest. I've been fencing for 20 years. Now it's 21. So it's pretty much how I've grown up, everything, how I value things, how I spend my time, the people I know, my community, all is rooted in sport and fencing. So like departing from that is a big challenge, because it's like, what do you do now? And like, what do you want now? What satisfies you? I think a lot of us who do sports, like we really value being good at something, and now you don't compete. So what's filling that like kind of need or this want to win? Because, you know, as athletes, we're always trying to get to the top. So like, what am I getting to the top of now? And even reframing that I need to get to the top, like that's a whole relearning that I think you need to go through. And so this reflective period, I think, is super important, but it's also a challenge because like the time, the resources, like finding the next thing that you want to do. And I think we all want to have that thing that's like how we define ourselves, or like partially how we define ourselves, like things we commit to, like things we care about. So I think it's a huge challenge. And I'm very patient with myself. But I think recognizing what Dr. Parham was saying, like recognizing that you are not what you do. You're this capable, powerful person, and you can apply that to wherever else you want to. I think it becomes a journey of like, where do you want to apply that to? Like, what do you care about? And just kind of taking action and starting there. That's what I found. I've just invested my time, my energy in things I care about, like my foundation and like sports policy and things that I know, like blending together things I'm good at, like writing, like analyzing things, making arguments with sports and just like racial justice. So I've just tried to immerse myself in things that I feel like I've cared about beyond fencing, blending it with fencing, and it's just a step forward in that direction, and like the next thing happens and then you go in that direction. So it's a really unsettling experience to not know where you're going. And I think something else about sport is you kind of know where you want to go. You want to go to the Olympics, you want to go to world championships, you want a medal. So it's very well defined where you want to go. And I think when you enter this life, what's really shocking is like, there's no clear roadmap. Like it's like, you could be a teacher, you could get your PhD, you can go to business school. Like there's so many options. And then it's like, when you choose that direction, like how do you define a gold medal? Like it's really hard to equate that to what you're used to. And so you have to kind of relearn this system of wins, of like accomplishments. And like, even that is also like, how much do you want to value that? There's people in your life, there's families, like there's a lot of things you've probably neglected, committing to sport your whole life. So there's just so many things to experience in life. that you now recognize, I feel behind. Like I haven't been living a life like as an adult. And like now I feel like, oh, this is what it's like to be an adult. Like you have to book your own trips places. Like there's just so many basic things that are just taken care of as an elite athlete. And now it's not my life. And so I've had to acclimatize to life as a non-athlete, which is also so inevitable. But it's a challenge. And like, honestly, there's lots of hard days. There's lots of great days. And like, I like what you're saying, Alexi, about the thirds. I think that makes a lot of sense. And is a great way to appreciate the lows and the highs and the like, okay, today was a day. I got through the day. So I really like thinking of it in that way. And honestly, it's just step by step, like anything else. And I think in sport, you learn that, okay, to be patient with yourself and learn how to pick yourself up on those days. I think we're good at that, and finding solutions. So I think it's a challenge, like I said, to be in this transition, but like having faith and trusting that you'll make it to a point where you feel settled and you'll feel comfortable. And like every day you're working towards that. So whatever that looks like.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, you guys can just shut me up if you want me to talk, but I feel like there's like a couple things that I like heard you say that like reminded me of, so like as athletes, like we're really into like plugging into like rules or like visuals, like just we like to like be on the track or whatever. And I think like there, you have a coach who guides you perhaps, or someone you look up to, and when that's over, I feel like we still need something to like latch onto. Or maybe you've found that I'm just like a very like metaphorical thinker that really helps me. And I feel like there's a few examples in nature that really apply here and that we can look to because like it existed before us. And the first thing is wolves. Okay, so wolves in the wild, like in real life, like deadly wolves, they like travel in packs and they could kill each other, right? Like they are deadly, but they don't. And they reassure each other by like bumping noses and like nudging each other and stuff, just to like remind each other that they're like safe and stuff. And I think that as athletes and then as humans, whatever, we can be each other's wolf pack, and like to need the reassurance or to be like, it's okay to like not feel settled right now, or this, that, and the other is so important. And I think I so easily have the instinct of like, why do I need reassurance about this? Like I'm jumping into writing more, acting more as my running career changes. And I think I could think I must be self-conscious, or like I must not, be very confident as a person to need this wolf pack. But I think we should lean on each other. So I think that's like one thing where it's like just saying it and knowing that like the wolf pack is important and it's a part of nature is one thing. And then the other thing I was thinking about a lot lately are butterflies. You guys are going to be like, this flower child. But I was given this metaphor so Dr. Apea like keeps in touch with me and keeps tabs on me, and he's still a mentor. And I was going through like somewhat of a transition with like how running fits in with my life and how it balances with my artistic stuff. And I was sort of sidelined and just like completely at a loss for a period of time and confused. And I was like calling myself like a hot mess a lot. And like, I was like, I'm going to put it back together. I'm going to fix it. And he was like, whoa, 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 whoa. He was like, did you know that when caterpillars become butterflies, they go into a cocoon, chrysalis, and they become liquid, glop, like pure liquid. And then they become a butterfly. He was like, they don't just sprout wings. And he was like, I don't think you're a hot mess. He's like, I think you're glop. And he basically like reframed that whole time that like, maybe you're still in, because you're like, it was just 2019 was literally yesterday. Okay. And he was basically like, you're turning into a butterfly. And what was so helpful about that was that then I started marching around the house and I was like, I'm glop, like I'm glop. And it was so much better than feeling like a mess. And also he we had this discussion, and I was like, but what's the difference between humans and butterflies? And butterflies or caterpillars or whatever, they're unconscious during their glop state. So they don't feel the pain of glophood, but humans feel it. Like we are in there feeling this discomfort of the transformation. And we also have the choice to go back and stay a caterpillar forever. And that's the biggest moment for probably you and me. It's like all these decisions we're making could take us back and try to, stay where we were, or we can make decisions that will lead us to our like butterfly dumb, which is just the next phase. And I just think it was such a beautiful metaphor because it means that like, yes, we're always going to remember our phantom thoughts from being a caterpillar, but that doesn't mean that those thoughts are useful anymore, whether it's like the way that we value, our performance and this and that. But point is, I just feel like all of these like transitions, this, that, and the other don't have to be so painful, but we do have to like reframe them so that the pain is like expected and that it's celebrated and that you're not alone and that there's time for it. And that we don't feel encouraged to become the caterpillar again when we're ready to be a butterfly, clearly. And I think there's just so much there that is not shameful. But it's really, really a lot easier to feel shame and responsibility and pain. I don't know why I said all that other than I just think you're going to be the greatest butterfly and you're already doing it, but maybe you're a glop still, and that's okay too,
Thank you. So are you.
Yes, it's coming along.
Butterfly.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much to all of our panelists and all of our speakers today. It is 2 p.m., so we're going to conclude soon. But I just wanted to thank everyone for joining in this conversation. I wanted to thank our audience members. A quick note, we had a lot of really great questions that came in through the Q&A chat feature, and we weren't able to get to all of them. And so I just wanted to say that this event is the first of a series that we're going to be having at the New School about athlete mental health and well-being. So we hope that we can take these questions and we can put them into our next event and keep this conversation going. We hope that this event will inspire more conversations and action as we move forward as a field. Before we sort of end the webinar, I wanted to turn things back over to Adam Brown, who is the Vice Provost for Research and Associate Professor at the New School for Social Research and the Director of the Trauma and Global Mental Health Lab that is hosting this event.
Thank you all so much. This was an incredibly rich day. Nicole, Chloe, thank you again for your vision and your leadership in organizing this. Thank you to the athletes, the journalists, the entrepreneurs, everyone who participated today. I think we can all agree that, the conversation is already rich, so deep, but it really is just the beginning. And if we are going to chart a way forward, it's going to take all of us together to really think through the nuances and the complexities for the future. I think part of what I hear today is you're all not only thinking about yourself. The reason you're here is because you're really thinking about the future of sport, future athletes, future kids who are coming into this and trying to work this all out to support them. So as Chloe said, this is the beginning of a longer series of conversations and dialogue. Please don't be strangers. We'll be in touch with all of you. I hope that's okay. And to all of our audience members, thank you for taking the time out to be out there in our community and looking forward to talking more. Thanks, everyone.